Welcome to our February education series. Today, we are going to be talking about best practices on Intacct for nonprofits. And we have Wes with us today. He's a senior consultant in our technology solutions area. Just a couple housekeeping things. Everyone is going to be muted during this webinar. If you do have questions, please put them in the chat function. I'll be monitoring that through the webinar. We're hoping to kind of put the questions at the end, but I'll be monitoring that and see when that question is appropriate to be answered. And we are recording the webinar. It will be available for you via email next Monday. And so you'll be able to get that then. And during that email also, there will be a survey that we hope you would fill out and let us know if there's other topics or things that you might like to see in the future. And other than that, I will hand it over to Wes to start the presentation. Thanks, Wes.
Yep. Thank you, Brandy, and good morning, everyone. Let's go ahead and get the show started here. I'm going to share my screen and get my slideshow started. And Brandy, just to be sure, does everything look good here? Do you see the main screen here?
Yep, everything looks good.
Great, perfect, thank you. So thank you again, everyone, for joining this morning. And pretty much over the next half hour or so, we're just going to be covering some general Intacct best practices that are very important or very useful for nonprofits, but they're also they're also important for for-profits as well, but with more nonprofit focus for sure. And the main topics we're going to be covering are three overall topics for user-defined books, dimension groups, and hierarchical dimensions. There's a whole lot more interesting things you can do with, there's a lot more features than this that you could be utilizing in Sage Intacct, but this is more of a short webinar. We're going to focus on these three for today. So the first one that I wanted to get us started off with is user-defined books, because for those of you on the call who may already be on Sage Intacct, this is something that you may already be using in some capacity. But if you're not using it, this is definitely one of those things that you want to be looking at potentially using. The main reason why you'd want to use something like, or what a user-defined book essentially allows you to do, is it gives you more streamlined ability to track encumbrances, track allocations and report on allocations, and really a lot more. And really, the main benefit of user-defined books, or the main replacement, or the main thing that user-defined books replace, would be all of these outside Excel spreadsheets that you may have, where you have all these workbooks and spreadsheets that calculate out what your reports are with or without allocations, with or without your encumbered costs or your committed costs, whatever you want to call them. And there's other. Maybe you have some special events or some pensions that you want to track separately from your main general ledger while still being able to report on it. The nice thing about using user-defined books in Intacct would be it's super easy to include or exclude user-defined books from reports. So let's just say you have a user-defined book for allocations. So every single month you're inputting your departmental allocations in there. And when you do that, then you can very easily run a report that says, hey, show me my pre-allocated balances, and then show me my allocated balances side by side. That way you can arrive at a true performance metric of what your total expenses are per department, per grant, per location, etc. And for those of you who are currently on Sage Intacct, I wanted to make sure I put some instructions on these slides so that when you download the slides and save them to your computer or print them out somewhere, that you have just some general instructions on how to get started here. To get user-defined books set up in Sage Intacct, you would do so under your General Ledger Module tab or your General Ledger module, and then go under your Setup tab. There's a little bit more to it than just that. There's a little bit more setup you have to do in the configuration screen of the general ledger to enable the usage of user-defined books, but that's generally where you would go to get started here. But I wanted to include some quick examples on how user-defined books are used in reports, both financial and your standard module reports. This example that I have right here is just a quick snapshot that shows the filter section of just a trial balance or a general ledger report inside of Intacct. And what this allows me to do is this allows me to select either individual or multiple user-defined books to combine with my main reporting book. So in this case, I have a reporting book for accrual. This is an accrual-based company, but yours may be cash basis, one or the other. But I have 4 different user-defined books that I could use in my report. I have a gap book, I have a settlement book, I have commitments, I have a book for commitments and allocations. In this example that I have up here, I'm deciding to include my commitments book as well as my allocations book so that this report that generates will show me my totals with commitments booked as well as all my allocations booked. But as you can see, you can select whatever you want here. You can combine everything into one, not include anything. And then finally, I want to draw your attention to that little checkbox right above selected items where it says combine reporting book with other books. And by using this checkbox, this allows you to say whether you want to bring in your main accrual balances or just ignore your accrual balances. On the next slide, it'll dive into a little bit more as to how this may be used. But moving on to this next slide to kind of segue into this instance of a financial report inside of Intacct is you can use user-defined books and their account balances in separate columns within your financial reports. So what I have here is a little screenshot of a financial report, the financial report writer in Intacct, where in column one there where it says current year-to-date balance, under the reporting book area, it just says accrual. So in column one, the only balances that this is going to report on are your main accrual books, your main entries. But in column two, and I expanded this out to show more detail, but under column two in the reporting book or in the other books area as well, it says I'm including my commitments book, but I'm not including my accrual reporting book. So what this essentially means is the results of column two, when I run this report, is it's only going to be my committed costs. So I'm going to have one column with my actual balances of things that I've gotten billed for or paid. And then in my second column, I'm only going to show my commitments that we haven't quite gotten billed for yet. And then in a normal or in most financial reports, in most instances, you would have a third column here as well to summarize the two or add the two together. All right, so moving right along here to dimension groups. But before I do so, I did want to mention for user-defined books as well, I gave you some general instructions on how to get things started on your side. If you have any questions about if they would be a neat fit for a certain use case, feel free to reach out to either myself or the support email, and we can assist you further with, does it make sense to add user-defined books or does something else do the same thing? But with that being said, moving on to dimension groups. Dimension groups are a feature inside of Intacct that allow you to dynamically filter for certain dimensions. Moving on to my next slide here. When you build out a dimension group, these allow you to report on a bunch of different dimension codes and group them together based on geography, certain type of product, certain type of department, things like that. So for those of you who may not be in Sage Intacct today, what a dimension is inside of Intacct is a code that represents a department or represents a location or a grant or something like that. For those of you who may be running QuickBooks today, you can think of a dimension in Intacct as a class within QuickBooks. It's just you have a lot more of them and you can do a whole lot more robust reporting against them. But with dimension groups, you can create sets and groups of dimensions that allow you to say, with locations, for instance, I may have a whole bunch of West Michigan locations, and then I can put all those West Michigan locations in a West Michigan dimension group. Then I can create another one for Southeast Michigan or Southwest Michigan or Northern Michigan. And then when you run financial reports or any type of report, really, you can say, I want to run this report for West Michigan, or I want to run it for my South Michigan locations. And that way you can get a true, you can get better summarized reporting by region or by type of department, things like that. And this is going to be covered more in this next slide, but dimension groups are used primarily in dimension-based reports in Sage Intacct. And those are reports where the dimensions go down the rows. So what I'm going to call standard type of financial report inside of Intacct, those account-based reports have your accounts down the rows. So your assets, your liabilities, your equities, your expenses and your revenues down the rows, which is more traditional textbook financial reports. But Intacct supports dimension-based reports where down the rows, instead of accounts, you have things like customers or your vendors or locations or departments or product lines and things like that. I'll show you an example of that in a moment. But again, to give you some basic instructions on where to go to access dimension groups, these are going to be under your reports module, under the setup tab, under dimension groups. So to give you an example of the different types of dimension groups that you can utilize in Sage Intacct, I have a couple of screenshots here. And really, they can be either hard-coded to very specific dimensions, or they can be set up to dynamically filter on a certain set of criteria, or multiple sets of criteria potentially. But up in the upper left, I have a department group that I'm creating called Program Services. And for Program Services, I'm using the group type of specific members. For the specific members group type, this is where I can select very specific departments that make up this group. And as you can see in the members listing there, I have operations, marketing, fundraising, and outreach. So when I run a report and filter it for my Program Services department group, it's only going to show me the results for those 4 departments. But since the group type is specific members, it's only going to include those 4 unless you manually go in and add more. The example in the lower right is the department group for operations. Now this one is a little bit different because the group type that we're using is the all members group type. And what this means is that this is going to automatically and dynamically pull in any department that meets a certain criteria or set of criteria. And in this case, anything in that filters area down at the bottom of the lower right example for operations, my filter is looking for the initiative field on the department object, and it's looking for any initiatives or any departments that have the initiative of operations. So I could set up theoretically 50 departments today, and if I tag 30 of them with the operations initiative, it's Intacct this department group is smart enough to know that those 30 that I flagged as operational departments will automatically get pulled into that group. So ultimately, you end up with the same results. It's just there's 2 different ways of going about it. And one of these may be fine if you have like 10 departments across your entire company. But if you have thousands of products, for instance, and you want to group those products together based on a certain criteria, like a type of product or whether it's disposable or whatnot, then maybe using the all members group type is going to be more efficient. And as I promised earlier, I wanted to give a little bit of a quick screenshot of what this looks like, or what the usage of dimension groups looks like in financial reports. So like I said earlier, in dimension-based financial reports in Sage Intacct, it allows you to at the top there, it allows you to choose, I want to pull in my fundraising group, and then below my fundraising group, I have my management in general, and then I have my operations group under that. And the output I get is down below, where it pretty much shows expenditures for the year of 2022, and it shows me the individual details for and the summary for my fundraising departments. And the same, the detail and the subtotal for management in general. And then the details and the subtotal for total operations. So with a dimension-based report like this, you can take this report and put it on a dashboard so that your department managers can go look and see what's my total expenditures for the year or the month or year to date for all the departments that I have access over or control over. All right, so moving right along here. So we've covered user-defined books, just a real quick overview of user-defined books, real quick overview of dimension groups. And we are going to have some time at the end of this, so feel free to either save your questions for then, or like what we were talking about earlier, just submit it in the chat and we can stop if needed. But the last topic I wanted to cover real quick as part of this session today are hierarchical dimensions. And really, for the most part, hierarchical dimensions, the end result that you get from them is pretty similar to dimension groups, in the sense where both hierarchical dimensions and dimension groups allow you to set up pretty much kind of roll up some subtotal categories where with dimension groups, we say the West Michigan dimension group is picking up these 5 West Michigan locations. But with a hierarchical dimension, you can do something similar, where you roll up 5 of those West Michigan locations into a West Michigan like parent dimension. However, with hierarchical dimensions, even though the effect is similar, they can be more appropriate in some cases, and they're a little bit more user-friendly in a way, because it kind of gives you a nice graphical layout of what rolls up into what. So it makes it a little bit more simple in some cases. But hierarchical dimensions, they give you some, just like with dimension groups, they give you the ability to have flexible filtering in your reports. You can pick and choose and filter for a parent dimension to roll up all the activity of the children dimensions. And in addition to that, you can have hierarchical dimensions set up to expand your reports, maybe have individual columns per location, and that rolls up into a parent dimension. And you can also use them for access restriction if you're working with certain dimension types. So with hierarchical dimensions, there's really nothing all that special. There's really no special spot in the system you need to go to set them up. Really, across most of the dimensions in the system, all you have to do is use the parent field when you're setting up a dimension to define roll-up logic. So all you have to do is, if you want to today all of a sudden roll up a bunch of your departments into an operating department parent dimension, all you have to do is set up a department called operations, and then edit all the children departments to have their parent field refer to operations. So you don't really have to do anything special outside of use that parent field that you've probably seen when setting up dimensions. All right. So one thing that I also wanted to mention, the other thing I wanted to mention is you can assign multiple levels of hierarchy across the. You can set up multiple sets of levels of hierarchy. So you can have a parent department with child departments, and then you can have children under those children. So you have like grandchildren departments, great-grandchildren departments, or grants, etc. I've come across some use cases with grants in particular, where you have like a super grant, and then each super grant has like a federal and a state grant, and then under those grants, there's individual line items. So Intacct can support many different levels of hierarchy. There was one day where I was just tinkering with this, and it let me set up 20 different layers of dimensions until I just figured, hey, this isn't really a great use of my time because no one's ever going to need that many levels. But just theoretically speaking, you can break it out into multiple levels if you so choose. But with hierarchical dimensions, even though the end results and the filtering capabilities are similar to what you're going to get with dimension groups, one of the benefits of, or one of the nice things about hierarchical dimensions is that you can more easily see the kind of relationships happening here. So off to the right here, I have some departments in that top, some grants or projects in that top image there, where you see, for example, that code 400, you have that Health Initiative 1 grant. And within that grant, you have the different award years down in the green node, the child level there. So what this allows you to do is your coding activity to 401, your coding activity to 401B, et cetera. You can report on all those grant years individually, but you can also run a report for 400 to include all of them. Same thing with department down below, the middle image there where you see outreach and management in general and accounting and everything. Those are departments, and you can see that the green nodes there for accounting, IT, executive, et cetera, those codes get posted to, but then all the activity for those departments rolls up into management in general, code 299. One thing I will note that if you do use hierarchical dimensions in this fashion, you may want to consider using the relatively new status type of active non-posting, which I have an image for at the very bottom. This hasn't always, if you've been on Intacct for several years, this is something that's been added only in the last couple of years. But this status of active non-posting allows you to use a particular parent dimension in reporting. But if you set it to non-posting, it means that you can't directly post to it, like post an entry to it, which usually you're not going to want to have, because if you have accounting, IT, executive, all those departments rolling up into management in general, you don't want to code an entry directly to management in general, because in order for something to be management in general, it needs to be allocated to either accounting or IT or executive. So, that's just a good example of hierarchical dimensions being used in Intacct. And as you can see, just to reiterate, it's a little bit more easy to see the impact of hierarchical dimensions as opposed to dimension groups, because you can actually build a little kind of hierarchy tree in Intacct with hierarchical dimensions. So those were the 3 topics I wanted to cover as part of our session today. I'm thinking and hoping that we have some questions. And Brandy, do we have any questions?
We have a couple. First question is, can you explain the relationship between dimension groups and dimension structures?
Yep, thank you. That's always a tricky thing to this. It's kind of funny because they're so similar, but they're effectively the same thing, but they're just used differently throughout the system. The easiest way I can describe it is as follows. So a dimension group on its own can only be used in filtering. So if you set up a dimension group on its own, the only way you can use it is by filtering a report, like in the filter screen or the filter prompts of a report. However, most of the time when you set up a dimension group, it also gives you the opportunity to set it up as a dimension structure as well. A dimension structure can be used in the actual row build out of a financial report. So pretty much you can think of it like this. A dimension group is used only in filtering, whereas a mentioned structure is used in the row setup of financial reports. It's kind of complicated because they're so similar and they look similar. They're just used in different places. But that's a good question. Thank you.
Thank you. And one more. Is there a limit on how many user-defined books that you can set up?
Nope, there's absolutely not. And I can't remember if I mentioned it earlier, but there's also no cost to adding user-defined books either. Yeah, you can set up as many user-defined books as you want. I've had some clients set up close to 10 of them. Most likely, most clients who need to use them usually end up with one or two, usually one for commitments and one for allocations. But there's so many different use cases for them. You can set up as many as you want. And like I said, no additional cost.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Wes, for presenting today. And I want to thank everybody for joining us today. As I mentioned earlier, you will receive an email on Monday with a recording of this webinar. And also you will have Wes's information is right on the last slide there. If you have follow-up questions that you need assistance with, and you can also reach out to me, Brandy Makula, here at Maner Costerisan. And we really appreciate you joining today. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and thank you, everyone.
All right, great. Yep. Thank you, everyone, for your time today. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll talk to you later.